The job listing didn't look real, which is usually how you know it is. No company logo, no website, just a block of text posted on a regional classifieds page between a listing for used snow tires and someone offering off-grid carpentry services, cash only. The title read, "Night Shift Caretaker Needed, Remote Lodge, Northern Ontario." The pay was higher than anything else on the page, not suspiciously high, just high enough to feel like a correction, like someone had finally decided to pay what isolation was actually worth. I read it twice. Duties were simple: maintain property overnight, ensure security of premises, monitor basic systems. No experience required, accommodation provided. One line at the bottom stood out more than the rest. Applicants must be comfortable working alone for extended periods. That wasn't a warning. That was the job. I had been out of work for 4 months. Before that, I'd been a copy editor at a mid-sized paper in Ottawa, which sounds more stable than it is. The layoffs came in waves, each one framed as restructuring, until there was nothing left to restructure. I lasted longer than most because I was quiet, consistent, and didn't ask for anything. That kind of reliability only matters right up until it doesn't. The last paycheck had gone to rent, the one before that to groceries, and a credit card minimum that kept resetting like a bad joke. By the time I saw the listing, I had exactly $312 in my account, and a landlord who had started using the phrase, "next steps," in emails. So I replied. No resume, just a short message saying I was available immediately, and had experience working independently. That part wasn't a lie, depending on how you defined experience. I got a call 6 hours later. The man on the other end introduced himself as Paul Fitzgerald. His voice was controlled in a way that felt practiced, like he'd learned to remove anything unnecessary from it. No small talk, no filler. "You understand this position is isolated," he said. "Yes." "You would be the only staff member on site overnight." "Yes." "There are operational guidelines that must be followed exactly." A pause, not long, but deliberate. "Exactly," he repeated. I said yes again. He didn't ask about references, didn't ask about my previous job, just confirmed I could be on site by the following evening, and gave me directions that ended with a set of coordinates instead of an address. Before he hung up, he said, "Bring what you need for 2 weeks. After that, we reassess." That was it. No email confirmation, no paperwork. Just a job that existed because someone said it did. The drive took 6 hours. Highway gave way to smaller roads. Smaller roads gave way to stretches of pavement that looked like they hadn't been maintained in years. And eventually, even that narrowed into a 2-lane strip cutting through dense pine. The further north I went, the more the world simplified. Fewer buildings, fewer signs, fewer decisions. By the last hour, there was nothing but trees and the occasional break in them where a mailbox leaned slightly to one side, suggesting a house set far back from the road that I never actually saw. My signal dropped to 1 bar, then none. I kept driving. The car started making a sound about 20 minutes from the coordinates. Not loud, not immediate, just a subtle change in the engine's rhythm, like something small had shifted out of place and decided not to announce itself. I turned the radio off to listen, which didn't help. It just made the silence louder. At 6:47 p.m., the engine stopped. No warning lights, no violent shake, just a quiet, mechanical ending. I coasted to the side of the road and sat there with both hands still on the wheel, waiting for something else to happen. When nothing did, I tried the ignition. Once, twice, a third time, slower. Nothing. The kind of nothing that doesn't argue. Outside, the light was thinning into that gray-blue stage where everything looks flatter than it should. The trees on either side of the road stood close together, their tops knitting into a darker line that cut off most of the sky. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course, I got out of the car more out of obligation than intention and opened the hood. Heat rose up in a soft wave, carrying that metallic smell engines have when they've decided they're done cooperating. I stood there, looking down at something, and hands on my hips, like posture alone might translate into competence. It didn't. Headlights appeared behind me about 5 minutes later. They came around the bend slowly, not the rushed approach of someone trying to pass, but controlled, intentional. The car, a dark blue sedan, pulled in behind mine and stopped at a distance that felt measured rather than convenient. The driver's door opened. The man who stepped out matched the voice I'd heard earlier in a way that was immediately clear. Mid-40s. Clean, precise. His shirt was pressed in a way that didn't belong on a road like this at dusk. "Mr. Calloway," he said, not asking. "Yes. Paul Fitzgerald." We shook hands. His grip was brief, firm, and ended exactly when it needed to. "My car died," I said, gesturing unnecessarily. "I can see that." He looked at the engine for less than 3 seconds, then closed the hood with a single decisive motion. "I'll arrange a tow in the morning. We should get to the lodge before dark." The way he said it made before dark sound less like a preference and more like a boundary. I grabbed my bag and followed him to his car. The interior was clean to the point of absence. No clutter, no personal items, nothing to suggest the vehicle belonged to a person rather than a function. We pulled back onto the road. For the first minute, neither of us spoke. The trees moved past in a steady blur, their shadows stretching longer as the last of the light drained out of the sky. Then he said, "There are guidelines." I turned slightly toward him. "For the position," he added. "You'll receive a printed copy at the lodge. I'm going to explain them now." The phrasing wasn't casual. It was procedural. "Okay." He nodded once, as if confirming something. "Rule 1, he said. All exterior doors remain locked from sunset to sunrise. Front, rear, and service entrance. You will check them personally each night." A pause. "Understood?" "Yes." "Rule 2. You do not respond to any sounds from outside during night hours. No knocking, no voices, no calls for help. You do not acknowledge them in any way." I waited for him to clarify. He didn't. "Understood," he repeated. "Yes." The trees along the road had darkened into a near-solid wall now, the gaps between them disappearing into something uniform and depthless. "Rule 3, he continued. If you observe a person outside the lodge after dark, you will not approach them. You will not open the door. You will contact me and wait until morning. That seems... It will make sense," he said, cutting across the thought without raising his voice. His hands stayed steady on the wheel. "Rule 4. Basement access is restricted. The door remains locked at all times. The key will be provided. It is not to be used." The road curved. Headlights swept across a break in the trees, and for a moment, I saw it. The lodge. Low, wide, set back from the road. Light glowed behind curtained windows, warm and contained. It should have looked like relief. It didn't. "Rule 5, Paul said, slowing the car. "All window coverings are to be closed before dark. Fully closed, no gaps." We turned into the gravel drive. The tires crunched softly as we approached the building. "Rule 6. The radio is to remain off between 10 p.m. and sunrise." The car came to a stop. "Rule 7. Exterior lights are not to be directed toward the tree line." He turned the engine off. Silence settled in, thick and immediate. "Rule 8, he said, finally looking at me. "There is a storage room off the main hall containing items left by previous employees." A slight pause. "You are not to enter that room." He held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "Do you understand all 8 rules?" I nodded. He watched me, like he was measuring whether that answer meant anything. Then he opened his door. The lodge was warmer inside than it had any right to be. Not just temperature. The air itself felt contained, like the building held on to heat more tightly than it should. The entry opened into a long main hall lined with dark wood paneling, that absorbed most of the light instead of reflecting it. Lamps had been placed at intervals, each one casting a soft amber pool that didn't quite reach the next, leaving thin seams of shadow between them. Paul moved ahead of me without hesitation, his pace consistent, like he'd walked this exact path enough times that deviation wasn't part of the pattern anymore. "This way," he said, though there was only one direction to go. We passed a front desk on the right. A manila envelope sat on it, my name written in clean block letters. Beyond that, the hall opened into a sitting area with a stone fireplace and 2 armchairs angled toward it in a way that suggested conversation no one was currently having. Paul didn't slow down. He stopped at the first door on the left and turned the deadbolt, then the handle, then the deadbolt again. A demonstration, not a check. "Front entrance," he said, "locked before sunset, checked after." He moved to the next door further down, repeating the same sequence. "Rear access." Then a third, narrower door near the end of the hall. "Service entrance." Each lock was heavier than expected, mechanical, deliberate. "You will check all 3 every night," he said, "in this order." I nodded, though he wasn't looking at me. He was already moving again. The kitchen was through an open doorway on the right. Stainless steel counters, a small table, and 2 large windows facing the back of the property. Thick curtains hung on either side, already drawn halfway. Paul stepped in and pulled one curtain fully across, then the other, overlapping them carefully until no seam remained. "Light carries." "Carries what?" he didn't say. We stepped back into the hall. "The radio," he continued, leading me into a small office. A desk sat against the far wall, with a compact radio unit and a set of security monitors above it. 4 feeds displayed the same exterior from different angles: front porch, parking area, rear entrance, and the tree line beyond. The trees looked closer on the screen than they had from outside. "Off at 2000, he said, tapping the radio once. "It stays off until morning." "Why?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment, not surprised by the question, just acknowledging it existed. "It won't be useful to you," he said. That wasn't an answer, it was a boundary. We stepped back into the hall. The storage room was the last door on the right. Plain wood. Unremarkable. If he hadn't stopped in front of it, I wouldn't have given it a second look. He didn't touch the handle. "Previous occupants," he said. "Their belongings are stored here." "How many?" I asked. He didn't respond immediately, just kept his eyes on the door. "Enough," he said finally. A pause. "You do not open this." The phrasing had changed slightly. Not should not are not to, just do not. Something in the way he said it made the rest of the hall feel narrower. "Understood," I said. He nodded once and moved on. The staircase was at the end of the hall, leading up to a small landing and a single room that would be mine. A bed, a dresser, a narrow window with the same heavy curtains already drawn. "Your quarters," he said. "You're not required to remain here overnight. Most duties are downstairs." Most. He turned back toward the stairs. "I'll leave you to settle in." "That's it?" I asked before I could stop myself. He paused halfway down. "For now." That phrase again. Not final, not complete. He returned to the front desk, picked up the envelope and handed it to me. "Guidelines are inside," he said. "Read them before 2100. I took it. "Paul," I said. He waited. "What happens if someone breaks a rule?" For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't answer immediately. His eyes shifted briefly toward the office, toward the monitors, then back to me. "They don't tend to finish the job," he said. It wasn't evasive. It was precise. He checked his watch. "I'll return in the morning," he added. "Your vehicle will be at the garage in town by noon." Then he walked to the door, unlocked it, stepped outside, and closed it behind him with a soft, final click. I stood there for a moment, listening to his car start, the sound of tires on gravel fading as he drove back the way we'd come. Then, there was nothing. Not silence exactly. The building had its own quiet, subtle creaks, the low hum of something electrical behind the walls, but it was contained, separate from the outside. I locked the door. Then I checked it again. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. I opened it at the front desk. Inside was a small spiral-bound booklet, 8 pages, titled Lodge Operational Guidelines. My name had been printed on the first page. Beneath it, the date. The rules were exactly as Paul had described them, but each one included a short paragraph underneath. Not explanations, procedures. Rule 2. Do not respond to external stimuli during night hours. Procedure. Maintain silence. Do not approach entry points. Do not engage visually beyond necessary confirmation. Necessary for what? It didn't say. Rule 3. Do not assist individuals outside after dark. Procedure. Contact supervisor. Await daylight before any external interaction. Again, no reason, just instruction. Rule 4. Basement remains secured. Procedure. Key remains in envelope. No exceptions. I paused there. The key was taped to the inside of the booklet. Small, plain, labeled in black marker. Basement. I touched it, then closed the booklet. The office clock read 8:12 p.m. I still had time. I walked the lodge slowly, not out of curiosity, but to map it. Front desk to kitchen, kitchen to rear door to office, office to staircase, back again. Every path led through the main hall. At 8:45, I checked the doors. Front, locked. Rear, locked. Service, locked. I checked them again at 9:10, still locked. At 9:30, I went into the kitchen and closed the curtains completely, making sure they overlapped the way Paul had shown me. I stood there for a moment, with my hands still on the fabric, aware of how little separated me from whatever was outside. Just glass, just cloth. At 9:58, I sat in the office and watched the clock. 10 o'clock. I turned the radio off. The silence that followed felt different, just more defined. Like something had been removed that I hadn't noticed was there until it was gone. I stayed in the office for another hour, watching the monitors cycle through their 4 angles. Nothing moved. The parking area was empty. The porch still. The tree line a dark, uneven wall. At 11:07, I went upstairs. Sleep came slowly. Not because I was afraid, at least not in any way I would have admitted, but because the rules had settled into my mind in a way that made them difficult to ignore. They weren't complicated. They weren't even unreasonable on the surface. Lock the doors. Close the curtains. Don't go outside. Simple. But simplicity doesn't explain itself. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, replaying Paul's voice in the car. The pauses, the emphasis, the way each rule had been delivered like a line item in something larger than I hadn't been shown. At some point, I fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of knocking. Not loud, not urgent, measured. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. I checked the clock beside the bed. 1:53 a.m. For a moment, I stayed where I was, not moving, just listening. Same pattern. 3. Pause. 3. I got out of bed. The floor felt colder than it had earlier. I moved to the top of the stairs and looked down into the dark hallway. The lamps were still on, casting the same pools of amber light, unchanged. The front door was at the far end. The knocking came again. 3. Pause. 3. Then a voice. Hello? Slightly strained, like she'd been speaking for a while. Is someone there? I took a step down. Rule 2. I stopped. Please, she said. I need help. Her voice cracked on the last word. I moved down another step before I realized I'd moved at all. The rules weren't abstract anymore. They were in the room. I stood halfway down the stairs, one hand on the railing, listening. "Please," she said again, "closer now. I know you're in there." The voice carried clearly through the door, not muffled the way it should have been, not distant. It sounded like she was standing right on the other side of the wood, close enough that if I reached out and opened it, there would be no space between us at all. My body leaned forward before I decided anything. Rule 2. Do not respond. Do not engage. Do not approach entry points. I had already broken one of those. I took another step down. The hallways stretched longer than it had earlier. The spaces between the lamps deeper, the light less certain. The front door sat at the far end, still, unchanged, except now it was the center of everything. "I'm hurt," she said. "Please." There was something in the way she said it that made it specific, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just direct, believable. I reached the bottom of the stairs. My feet made almost no sound on the wood floor, but I felt each step anyway, like the act of moving carried more weight than it should. "Can you hear me?" she asked. Yes, I thought. I didn't say it. I stopped a few feet from the door. The peephole sat at eye level, a small circle of glass set into dark wood. Harmless. Ordinary. The kind of thing you don't notice until you need it. "I don't have much time," she said, urgency sharpening her voice now. She cut herself off. A pause. Then quieter, closer to the door. "He's behind me." My hand moved toward the deadbolt. I didn't tell it to. Rule 2. I pulled my hand back. My heart was loud enough that I was sure she could hear it through the door. "I can hear you moving," she said. That stopped me. I hadn't made a sound. Or, I didn't think I had. "I know you're there," she continued, softer now. "Please don't do this." The phrasing shifted something. Not just fear, not just urgency, guilt. I stepped closer to the door, slowly, deliberately. My eye lined up with the peephole. For a moment I hesitated. Then I looked. She stood on the porch under the amber light, exactly where the voice had placed her. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back loosely. White scrubs stained at the sleeve, a tear at the shoulder exposing skin that looked scraped and raw. Her hands were pressed together in front of her chest, fingers tight, knuckles pale. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the darkness beyond the porch, then snapping back to the door. To me. No, not to me. To the door. "She's real," I said under my breath before I could stop myself. Her posture, the way she held herself even in panic, it matched. The details lined up too cleanly to be anything else. Someone from a clinic in town. Someone who needed help. My hand moved to the deadbolt again. Rule 3. Do not assist individuals outside after dark. The rules were starting to overlap. Contradict. If she was real, Rule 3 applied. If she wasn't, I didn't finish that thought. She slammed both palms against the door. The sound cracked through the hallway, sharp and immediate. "Please let me in." I flinched. Up close, through the peephole, I could see the strain in her face, the tension in her jaw, the way her breath hitched between words. Everything about it said real. Everything except the rules. I kept my hand on the deadbolt. Didn't turn it. "Please," she said again, quieter now. Her forehead pressed against the door. Her hand slid down slightly, leaving faint streaks where dirt and something darker had transferred onto the wood. Then she went still. Not gradually. All at once. The movement stopped. The scanning eyes, the shaking hands, the uneven breathing, all of it cut cleanly, like a switch had been flipped. I leaned closer to the peephole. She stepped back. One step, then another. Her arms lowered to her sides. Her posture straightened. The fear was gone. Not reduced. Removed. What replaced it wasn't calm. It was attention. Focused. Precise. She lifted her head slightly and looked directly at the peephole. Not at the door. Not at where a person might be. At the exact point where my eye was. A cold, immediate realization moved through me. There was no way she could know that. No way she could see through solid wood, through a lens no wider than a coin. And yet, she was looking directly at me. Her expression shifted. Slowly. The corners of her mouth pulled upward. A smile. At first, it was normal. Relieved even. Then it kept going. The movement didn't stop where it should have. Her lips stretched wider, pulling at the skin of her cheeks, creasing them past the point where muscle naturally resisted. Her teeth showed. Then more. The smile extended further, distorting the lower half of her face into something that resembled the idea of a smile more than the thing itself. Her eyes didn't change. They stayed fixed, steady, watching me watch her. I stepped back from the door so quickly, my shoulder hit the wall behind me. The impact knocked the air out of me in a short, sharp burst. Her voice came through the door again. Different now. Flat. Even. Like it had been filtered through something that removed all variation. "That's right," she said. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. "Follow the rules." A pause. Not empty. Waiting. For now. The words settled into the hallway, heavier than they should have been. I forced myself forward again. Not to open the door. Just to look. Through the peephole. She was still there. The smile still stretched too wide across her face. She held it for a moment longer. Then, without breaking eye contact with the peephole, she turned. The movement was almost correct. Almost. Her weight shifted a fraction too late with each step, like her body was following instructions that arrived just slightly behind when they were needed. She walked down the porch steps, across the gravel, toward the tree line. The darkness at the edge of the property absorbed her gradually, the amber light falling away from her in pieces until she was just a shape. Then nothing. I stayed at the door long after she was gone. My hand hovered near the deadbolt, not touching it now, just existing in the space where a decision had almost been made. Rule 2. Rule 3. They weren't abstract anymore. The only reason the door was still closed. I stepped back slowly. The hallway felt different. Not changed. Revealed. Like something had been present the entire time, and I had just been given the ability to see the outline of it. I turned and walked to the office. The monitors showed exactly what they had before. Empty porch, empty parking area, tree line, still and silent. No trace of her, no movement, nothing. I sat in the chair and watched the screens until the black of night softened into gray. When morning finally came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like confirmation. Morning arrived slowly, like it was being allowed in, rather than arriving on its own. The gray light filtered through the edges of the curtains, thin and flat, carrying none of the warmth the lamps had pretended to provide the night before. I was still in the office chair, the monitors casting a dull glow across the desk, each feed unchanged. Empty porch, empty gravel, tree line exactly where it had always been. If not for the memory of the smile, too wide, too precise, I could have convinced myself nothing had happened. I stood up carefully, aware of how stiff my body had become, and walked to the front door. The deadbolt was still locked. I checked it twice. Then I stepped back and looked at the peephole. A small circle of glass. Nothing more. I didn't look through it. The booklet sat where I had left it on the front desk. I opened it again, flipping past the first few pages until I reached Rule 2. Do not respond. The words hadn't changed, but the weight behind them had. I read all 8 rules again, slower this time, paying attention not just to what they said, but what they avoided saying. Every line was precise, controlled, built to direct action without explaining consequence. They assumed you would understand eventually, just not before you needed to. At 7:42 a.m., there was a knock at the door. 2 knocks. Even. Measured. My chest tightened before I could stop it. Then I checked the clock. Morning. I approached the door slowly, positioning myself to the side of the frame. "Who is it?" I asked. A pause. "Paul." His voice was exactly the same as it had been the day before. Neutral. I unlocked the door and opened it. He stood on the porch in the same pressed shirt, hands resting loosely at his sides. His eyes moved past me briefly, scanning the interior, then returned. "You followed the rules," he said. Not a question. "Yes." Another pause. "What did it use to try and get you to open the door?" He said it plainly, like it was expected. "A woman," I said, "in scrubs, injured." He nodded once. "Local clinic." She looked real. It would. We stood there for a moment, the conversation sitting between us with the same controlled weight as everything else he said. "It knew where I was," I added. "The peephole." Paul's expression didn't change. "It learns quickly," he said. "Learns what?" The words settled harder than the rest. He stepped past me into the lodge, closing the door behind him. He didn't lock it immediately. Instead, he walked to the office and glanced at the monitors, confirming what they already showed. Empty. "It starts simple," he continued. "Familiar roles, people you would trust, people you're conditioned to help. And then," he turns back to me, "and then it gets specific." Something in his tone shifted there. Not enough to call it emotion, but enough to mark the sentence as different from the rest. "Has anyone ever," I started, then stopped. "Open the door," he finished. I nodded. "Yes." "What happened to them?" Paul held my gaze for a moment. "They stopped following the rules," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters." Silence settled again, heavier this time. He walked back to the front desk and picked up the booklet, flipping through it briefly before setting it down in the exact same position. "You'll go into town today," he said. "See people. Reset your frame of reference." Reset? It helps to remember what normal looks like. I almost laughed at that. Almost. "My car?" I asked. "At the garage by noon." He checked his watch again. "I'll return this evening." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Day 2 is usually when people start testing boundaries," he said without turning around. "I'm not planning to. They never are." Then he opened the door and stepped outside. I watched him drive away again. The same controlled departure, the same absence left behind. The lodge felt different in daylight. Smaller, less contained, but not safer. I spent the next hour moving through the same routine as the night before, checking doors, tracing paths, reinforcing the layout in my mind. Everything was the same, exactly the same, which made it worse. By late morning, I took the lodge's truck and drove into town. It was smaller than I expected. One main road, a gas station, a diner, a clinic with a blue sign that read Marsh Family Health. People moved normally, talked normally. Nothing about them suggested anything like what I had seen the night before existed anywhere near here. But when they noticed the truck, the lodge's truck, their expressions changed. Subtly. A glance held a second too long, a conversation cut short. Not fear, recognition. I didn't stay long. By noon, my car was ready. Paid in cash. I didn't have room to spare. I drove back to the lodge with the radio off. When I arrived, the building looked exactly the same as it had before. Unchanged. Waiting. I went inside and locked the door behind me. Checked it. Checked the others. Closed the curtains before the light started to fade. Sat in the office as the clock moved toward 10 o'clock. When it did, I turned the radio off. The silence returned. Defined. Complete. At 11:03, I heard it. Not knocking this time. Not a voice asking for help. Just a sound. Soft. Deliberate. From somewhere behind the lodge. I watched the monitors. Front porch empty. Parking area empty. Rear camera, movement. At the edge of the tree line, a figure, standing still. Too still. Facing the lodge. I leaned closer to the screen. The proportions were wrong. Not dramatically, just enough. Arms slightly too long. Head angled a few degrees off what natural posture would allow. It didn't move. Didn't approach. Just stood there, watching. Then slowly, it raised one hand. A small, casual wave. Like it knew me. Like it had already decided something. My reflection stared back at me faintly in the glass of the monitor. For a second, I couldn't tell which one I was supposed to be looking at. Then the figure at the tree line tilted its head. The same angle, and I understood. It wasn't trying to get in. Not yet. It was learning what it meant to be me.